education budget tonight. Our fearless leader, Mr. Chairman Slocum, is on Zoom tonight, recovering from his knee surgery. He promises he'll be back next week, so I'm going to assure that. But can we get a roll call?
Here.
John Wall.
Here.
David Borwick.
Present.
Peter Talbot. David Feldman.
Here.
Jim James. Here. Sandy Pavano.
Here.
Sylvia Nichols.
Here.
John Mylum.
Here.
Quorum is present.
Thank you. Please rise for a pledge of allegiance.
Of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so tonight we're going to be doing education, but before I go there, I want to talk about one of the highest education schools we have in our state, and congratulate the University of Connecticut Huskies on their national championship, because I know some of us have allegiance to them because we went there, and others because we live in this state and we love our Huskies. So congratulations to them. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to our chairman of our budget committee, Mr. Bari.
Thank you, Vice Chairman or Acting Chairman, Mr. Walsh. Don, okay, there you go. Good evening. This is our fifth budget workshop that we have. It will be the review of the largest budget that we have within the town. And I think with that, I'm really just going to hand it over to you guys. You don't have any, no, just hand it over to you guys and let you get ready with your presentation. We've had your budget books. We've looked through. We won't ask questions till after your presentation, if that's all right.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
I'll
Thank
just,
you.
we'll bring down the projector.
Okay.
And we'll start rolling here.
I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the Finance Committee Chair and Vice Chairman of the Board of Ed, who is also here tonight, Mr. Grippo, as an elected official.
Boy, we're not used to projecting at this time of day, but no, I think we're okay.
I remembered a pen. Look for the one I remember.
Oh, there you go. I was at a ribbon cutting it. I got changed.
Oh, that's right. They had that recently. Was it today?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is fine. It's all on here anyway.
All right. Well, thank you again, gentlemen, for the introduction, and ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to share our Board of Education budget. For anybody who's watching at home and may not know who I am, I'm Dr. Jeff Solon, the superintendent of the Cheshire Public Schools. And joining me this evening is our Chief Operating Officer, Mr. Vincent Massiana. I also want to acknowledge our Vice Chair and Chair of the Budget Committee, Mr. Adam Grippo, who's joining us as well. Unfortunately, Mr. Perugini, our chair, wanted to be here, but had a conflict come up that he couldn't avoid, but sends his regards. The theme of our budget presentation this year is prosperity and growth. And we think that that's thematic of our school system and broader community at a time where Cheshire has been really thriving. And there are many great things that come with that, the vitality of our community. And of course, there are challenges in how do we manage our growth and prosperity. And this budget seeks to address those things. So what does our budget provide? We have the resources to educate 4,200 plus students. And I think oftentimes we can kind of get the blinders on and see the education piece, but there's so much more to that, which includes transportation, mental health, nutrition, medical care, that we're kind of a small city unto ourselves throughout the school year. Of course, specialized services are necessary. We want to provide diverse opportunities for our students to engage in enriching activities outside of their typical curricular pursuits. I mentioned transportation and opportunities for growth. There's not just the classroom, but so much more. So I made an original request in considering the needs of our students and community. One thing maybe that wasn't mentioned on that original piece was the population growth that we've experienced, which I'll certainly delve more into momentarily. The the process begins with us meeting with our administrative team to look at things like our enrollment in each building, what programs do we have, where do we build off that, how do we move, and then we start with a first cut, if you will, of a budget. And I want to say that number was around 9% when it started, when we came out of that process. Obviously, this isn't my first meeting with the council, and we appreciate the fiscal prudence that's necessary in this process. And I pared that down to 5.2 million. It's certainly the largest increase we've ever asked for. This year, we're operating under some very unique circumstances, particularly around enrollment growth, some other things that we're going to get into. But this was the original presentation to the council. To give a little bit of history on our requests, the actual budget increases, actually, this goes beyond requests to the budgets that we've received over the years. You can see that all but 3 of the last, I think it's 14 years, have resulted in a budget under 3%. We have a very strong history of strong fiscal management, because not only in times where I would argue that the budget was short of the need, we still have found ways, but you worry about how long that we can string that out under completely different circumstances we're facing now. Our focal points as a school system, there are 2, and I share these because they are the lens through which we filter our decisions. When we cut down from 9 to our current percent increase, or to what I presented to the board, these were the 2 filters, the 2 areas that we say, are they supporting this? Are they enhancing or maintaining what we do? The marquee budget drivers, I've mentioned enrollment, that we have been seeing rapid growth, particularly at the K through 6 level. The medical benefits cost, I've had some conversations with folks already around that. I know that's a issue that draws a lot of attention from us on the Board of Ed side, as well as you on the town side. The ever increasing cost of medical benefits is a significant concern for all of us. The global energy market, things have stabilized, but are still up significantly from where they were at this time last year when we were planning our budget process. And then, the other variable here is mill rate offsets. I'm really proud of our growth and prosperity in the community. It's good stuff, and it certainly impacts our enrollment. And we've been able to, kudos to Sean and Jim and Arnett and the team and you for maintaining our very high budget, bond rating. So our per pupil expenditure, this is us relative to the state of Connecticut average cost per pupil. This is the most recent data we have available to us, that in essence, if we spent what the average Connecticut school system spends per student, so this really factors in, big schools, little schools, $10.8 million, our budget would increase to just meet the average. That's over what the budget was, not a $10 million increase this year, obviously. The enrollment piece, I think anybody who's paid any attention in the community understands that we went through a decline for a better part of a decade and are now rebounding and on the way up. Our projected enrollment for 23-24 is 4,083 from this NASDAQ report, except our current enrollment is actually 4,201. So we're already, more than 100, about 120 students in excess of where that projection was and growing. Just recently, we had to notify the realtors at Stonebridge Crossing off of Dickerman that as those units become occupied, they would typically go to Highland. But unfortunately, our enrollment there is 852 students already, and we just don't have continuing space. We don't have a ton of space at Chapman, but it's better, and it's technically even a closer drive. So we're unilaterally moving that one area that has not been populated yet to Chapman for next year, as we continue to build new buildings that can accommodate our growth. So budget considerations are basically a few different frames that we look at our budget through. A maintenance budget is kind of sustaining current services. A restorative budget, looking at areas that were historically cut and trying to address those areas and replenish some of those reductions. And then obviously an advancement budget is where we're building in new programs or taking a different approach and increasing a particular area, almost always with a purpose to support complex thinking or social emotional learning. This budget represents a maintenance budget, and I'll explain that better as we get to the end. But I wanted you to see where the budget categories as a portion of our total budget come from. The vast majority, we are a people-oriented business. We have about 400 teachers. The information about how many teachers we have, IAs, those things, that is a common question. That is in our budget book under staffing. If you look, you can see what buildings have how many staff members, and all that information is meticulously gathered and included in your budget book. For anybody, again, watching at home, you can go on our website, the Cheshire Public Schools website, under budget, under the Board of Ed and budget. There's all the same information that the counselors have before them is included online. So our salaries and medical benefits, understandably, are the lion's share of our overall budget. Support services, maintenance, and then our instructional piece is a relatively smaller piece of the overall pie. That's things like resources, textbooks, instructional materials that you would expect them to be. So where do our budget increases fall? 51% of the overall budget increase, about $2.6 million to almost $2.7 million, is dedicated to new certified and non-certified positions, plus the contractual increases that those staff members would receive. So all of our current staff that are returning would see, their contractual budget or their contractual increase. I think all in for our teachers, that's 2.75%. Plus, there are a number of new positions that we've had to hire to maintain our current ratios. At the end of this presentation, I'll give you each a copy if you don't already have it. Do you already have a paper copy? I see some folks taking notes. I just want to make sure that you have it. And you can be right it. Okay. I just wanted to make sure you weren't trying to feverishly write down what I was saying, not thinking you were going to get a copy. But everybody has a copy. We'll add this to our website as well. So employee benefits and salaries is the biggest component of the growth. Our instructional line increases by $100,000. Support services and maintenance, you can see where those increases lie. I was really curious about how does this compare relative to several years ago, proportionally, our budget. And, I went back and looked at 16-17 because in 16-17, our enrollment was roughly the same as what it's projected to be next year as we, descended toward the trough, and now we're ascending out of that. Numbers are roughly the same in terms of number of students. Where do our numbers come out? And you can see our salary line is 61.5% now, 61.3% back then. So fairly identical. Maintenance and operations has increased a little bit as our buildings continue to age and need a little bit more support. Our instructional expense and support services, special education services, we've been more efficient there. And then the instructional expense, we've also had the benefit of, really that's been a focus of our Bounce Forward plan, using our federal money to provide a lot of professional development to our staff. So that is a small, representation, a small piece of that, what amounts to 1.6% difference. But as you see, the employee benefits increase is 1.8% higher than it was in 16-17. The equivalent about $2 million, roughly. Actually a bit more than that, because 1% would be 850,000 roughly. So you can see where the medical benefits has taken a bite out of what we're able to do in other areas. And I just thought that was relevant information worth sharing with you, and after sharing it, obviously, with the board. So in our maintenance budget, the things that we're talking about maintaining are class size ratios, medical benefits at the actuarial level. There has been a lot of conversation over the last several years about what do we do about medical benefits. And, I think we've collectively committed to funding those at the actuarial level. Special education services are maintained in the budget. In essence, every discretionary account is flat funded, and we attempted to address our projected utility needs. So, things like gasoline for vehicles and for, busting, and electricity and heating for the buildings, projecting them out at, what we could guess is not going to be what we were projecting our resources to be last April when we went through this process. So our budget detail requests, these are the items where there was a line change of $150,000 or more. And you can see 71% of our overall increase is dedicated to teachers and medical benefits. That's the addition of staffing in most cases. So beyond that 2.75% contractual increase, we had to add staff to just maintain our current level of service given the growth in enrollment. And, we're really sensitive about where we place people. And I know I've shared with the group before, when we were having reductions in enrollment, when we were losing students, unless you lose 25 students out of fifth grade in one building, you can't just cut one teacher. Nevertheless, when you look at our average over the course of the last 10 years, when we were reducing staff, we would reduce about one teacher for every 25 to 30 students. And that's district-wide. In this case, as we've looked at where is the enrollment growing, and then how do we try and maintain those ratios. And it's amazing that it's identical, actually, to give away something before we get to that slide. So the paraeducator growth is reflective of the same with the teachers. It's the contractual growth plus new positions. Support service line is special education services, obviously with more students, even with the same percentage of students that receive special education services, that line is going to grow. Public utilities, I mentioned that the $155,000, 156 roughly adjustment for the growth in those fees, what they're charging. Those two overall, 88% of the overall budget increase. So obviously the lion's share of where our budget went up. So key budget summary, we have a net enrollment growth of 41 students next year. The vast majority of our growth occurs in pre-K 6. That we added 4 new classroom teachers to accommodate our growth. Elementary class sizes remain unchanged and you'll see some of the historic ratios in a moment. The enrollment growth is also driving special education staffing needs. So an additional special education teacher at Highland, behavioral analyst, a board certified behavioral analyst is what BCBA stands for, that supports special education services, speech and language service, obviously, paraeducator staff, and we have grown so exponentially that we're adding school nursing support as well. We talked about the actuarial funding of the medical benefits account, which amounts to about $1.5 million. And then operations and maintenance, that's the $156,000 I was talking about, as it relates, mostly to utility costs. So our net staffing changes, I talked about adding those positions at Norton. We were able to reduce one position, and then you can see where the rest of the distribution is created. That's 6.9 certified positions and 0.7 nursing. I mentioned here space is becoming an issue at Doolittle and Highland. We are no doubt going to be moving people to teach on carts and moving carts to rooms because we just don't have any space left at Highland. So I mentioned the fact that it's identical. The top half of the screen is what you see is the number of students in each section. This represents actuals, and we had a staff count of 116 students, 116 staff members for 2,182 students. That's an average of 18.8. The projected for next year is 2,257 students with 120 staff members, general education classes, 18.8 students, identical. So this slide, and it shows you the historical averages, the 18.8 across the district K through 6, and you can see that 22, 23, we were at 18.8, 23, 24, 18.8, and then as you look across, you'll see 17, 18, we hit that 18.8, but every other year we've been a little lower than that. So we're at really the high end of our threshold already there. In grades 7 and 8, we have a historic high for grade 7 class sizes at 26.4. That's, again, identical from last year to this year. And then grade 8 jumps from 21.8 to 23.1, which is not at our historical high, but certainly right at the average of what we've seen over the last 8 years or so. This just visualizes the historical class sizes a little differently. The blue line at the bottom is our elementary class sizes at 18.8. The green line represents our 8th graders. Next year is 23.1. And then you can see the historical high for the 7th grade at 26.4. High school staffing, the students per teacher in Derby High School, so we're in District Reference Group B. We're basically smack in the middle of that. Special education costs year over year. You can see from the left of your screen is the actual cost for special ed in 18-19 for items like teacher salary, instructional aid, all the way to 23-24 budget request. And you can see our overall percentage of students identified for special education is projected to be 15% next year, which is aligned, if not lower than the state average. That's kind of where things are across Connecticut now. You can see the growth from 18-19 to 23-24 as more students have been identified. Our efforts really focus on supporting students, particularly in the younger grades, who may be having difficulty to intervene, early intervention, and provide the resources and support so that we only are identifying students who need, the most specialized services. But, that there's a cost that's higher than the typical, per pupil cost. Our typical per pupil cost is around $18,000, $19,000. The special education per pupil cost hovers around $33,000. So we invest a lot in early intervention. Per pupil expenditure, for DERG B. You can see the DERG B communities listed there. We are obviously at the lower end of that in terms of our per pupil expenditure. I mentioned our Bounce Forward plan. These are the federal funds that we use, and the next slide will kind of get into a little bit more of how that's broken down. But in order to address the needs that our students had, we increased elementary assistant principal support at Doolittle, Norton, and Chapman incrementally to provide additional support for that early intervention process. Our assistant principals and principals oversee identifying students based on data and providing intervention plans and working through that process. We added a full-time reading and math specialist to cover Highland and Darcy, and then we have math support at the middle and high school. These are not included in our operating budget, but just part of our Bounce Forward plan to continue into next year. And you can kind of see where we've expended money. Initially, a lot of the money was allocated toward our cleaning contracts. We had a lot of intraday cleaning, of course, during the height of COVID. You'll probably remember the circus tents all over town where we had kids dining outside. It was al fresco lunch every day. A lot of the money was spent on basically making sure that our buildings were safe for occupancy, and that's why we were able to stay open much more than most of our peers. And then that has shifted now to kind of recovery, I guess, for lack of a better term. What needs and supports are most effective toward our recovery? Our plan is called Bounce Forward because we didn't want to bounce back to the way we were before. We wanted to try and bounce forward and be better than we were. And so we've invested a lot of money in our professional development piece. That's where aside from those few staffing pieces, which we've been able to carry through next year, the Bounce Forward plan addresses a lot of professional growth. So we went through this process with the Board of Education, and they certainly recognize the fiscal demands, and they made a $500,000 plus reduction in our budget, which basically guaranteed maintenance at best. So a lot of the things like instructional supplies, PD, those were reduced down, and you'll see in the next couple of slides where those reductions were zeroed out, or where those, any increments were zeroed out, or where there was no change. So certified salaries, recognizing that we really have to add staff to continue to meet the demand and just maintain our current services. You'll see that's where zero reductions were made. But starting with staff training at $2,500, you'll see that a lot of pretty much everything is zeroed out if it wasn't already zeroed out. To $108,000 reduction in the instructional items. The next, group of lines is some support services that was significantly reduced again where it wasn't already zeroed out. Some items where there were, specific obvious demands like pupil transportation contract was retained at the $104,000, $105,000 to address our busing. So I think the board was very strategic about, exactly engaging in a maintenance budget. And then you see down below for maintenance and operations, public utilities. Again, we talked about that. Heat and energy was retained. Everything else zeroed out. So, I mean, in essence, we're looking at, in this budget, a flat budget aside from the most essential needs, the staffing given our growth, the transportation contract, the heat and utilities, and of course insurance, as we've talked about. So, and like I said, this is a maintenance budget for a growing community. I talked a little bit about the Stonebridge Crossing. That's a 140 unit residential. Those are slated per the realtor to begin to be occupied over the summer. So it's very real. It's not like we think people are coming. I mean, there's, you can see the buildings going up as you drive around town. And as I said, that's great, our prosperity, and how do we continue to evolve and meet the needs of the folks that are moving into town. Some of the indicators of success, I would be remiss if I didn't take a minute to talk about, we talk about all the inputs, and spent a lot of time on that, I don't know, like 35 slides maybe on inputs. It's nice to talk a little bit about outputs and some of the things our kids did. This is one of my all-time favorite pictures, working in the district for 18 years. I've never seen anything like this, but every single girls' sports team won the SEC championship this year. And it's really, I talked to people that have been around a long time. They've never heard of such a thing. What a testament to our kids and, girl power to the nth degree. And on top of this, we had a very successful fall season. Our boys soccer team also won the state championship, actually, more than just the SEC. So congratulations to this dynasty that was created through our girls in the fall. Very excited about that. Very cool. Beyond that, we're really proud of the fact that every single Cheshire voting district approved new schools. Certainly, there's a recognition in there that our facilities needed to be addressed, but it's also, I think, some sort of validation of the work that our schools do and that our board, the direction that they provide. And so we're really proud of that as an output. We are ranked 11th out of 166 Connecticut districts in 3 through 8 performance. That is exceptionally high. We outperform a boatload of people who spend more money than we do because we do it really efficiently. And it's, again, another testament to our kids and our staff and our parents and that partnership that makes our student success possible. Niche.com in 2021 rated us the 516th best school system in America. And this year we're 330th on our quest to be number one. Now, I don't always think that, I really don't think niche.com is the barometer. When you look at how their information is compiled and how they evaluate. So I don't know that I fully agree with that, but I do know a lot of people pay attention to it. And if you're looking for a place to move in Connecticut, you're likely to be on here. And so I think it's a nice thing to at least talk about. And now I'm going to pass it over to Mr. Massiana, who can share our capital budget process.
Thank you, Dr. Solon. Good evening, everyone. I know we had a lot of numbers and a lot of facts and information. I have a lot less slides to present than Dr. Solon did, so, and we are switching gears here from our operating budget to our capital budget. What you see on the screen right now is one of the very early renderings that Tecton Architectures presented when they were presenting to the school building committee and were selected as the architects. This is the new North End property. That is not what the school is going to look like. It's just a rendering of, you know, how a test fit might look on the particular school. So that work is well underway. I thought it would be a good kickoff to the capital budget that we're about to present. And the town council members know, as of right now, we do have 8 school buildings, and they're aged anywhere from 52 to 111 years old at Hummiston. The important thing about this slide is just to remember that our schools are not only, you know, schools where our children go to learn, but all the way on the right side, you can see the typical number of after-school events where the schools serve as a basis for all types of community events. It's not just athletics, but it is other use that occurs in our school buildings, you know, every day, year in and year out. And so that is an important component of what we do as a school district, and it certainly comes into play as we design the 2 new elementary schools. So this is what we look like today. It's 8 school buildings. In 2026, when the 2 new elementary schools are occupied, our profile does change. Those top 5 schools, Hummiston, Cheshire High School, Dodd Middle School, Doolittle, and Highland Elementary, those buildings will remain. The 2 new schools, the new Norton and the new North End Elementary, those will be new. So from a capital budget perspective, we shouldn't have any capital budget requests for 20 years. That is the, you know, expected life before we need to start investing in roofs and other things. So from a capital budget perspective, those top 5 buildings are really where we focused this year's recommendations. And then those bottom 3 schools that are circled in red, Darcy, Chapman, and Norton, when the new schools are built, those schools come offline. It's not that we may not need to make investments in those schools. We need to keep them operating and keep them in good repair, but we haven't made any specific capital budget requests for those 3 buildings. And they will be going offline in 3 years from a school district point of view. However, I do want to point out that Norton is the only building that we know what its fate will be, right? That building will be demolished when the new Norton is built on the same property, you know, but the Darcy and Chapman buildings, those will remain unless there is an ultimate resolution on what's going to happen with those buildings. Sold, repurposed, demolished, and turned to green space. Those decisions need to be made, not incorporated in the capital budget, but certainly something, you know, important for the town council and our community to consider. So with that as a backdrop, we know that we've got 2 new schools coming in 3 years. And so as we built our capital budget, we did take a slightly different approach this year because we know what buildings we're keeping and what buildings we need to make investments in. And the last several years, until we knew what was happening with school modernization, we were kind of careful about what the requests were. So this is a look by building. Again, this is very high level. The total 5-year capital budget request is $52.3 million. And you could see that the 3 largest buildings would get the most funding: a high school, Doolittle, Dodd, less at Highland, that is a newer school, and then district-wide projects. I know this is very high level. There's a breakdown that we've provided with our capital budget. I won't speak to that, you know, tonight, but district-wide projects includes things that are common across the schools where we would need to do things like replace ceiling tiles and doors and other items that we don't attribute to one particular building. And you can see up at the top, Chapman, Norton, Darcy, have zeros because, as I explained, those buildings are coming offline. I do want to note that we didn't add any capital budget requests for central office in Humiston. That building's in a little bit of flux. We don't need anything specific right now, but that is something that will get discussion as we talk about phase 2 of school modernization. This is the same capital budget request for 5 years. It's that same 52.3 million, except we broke it down by category of improvement. So HVAC, 17.4 million, window replacements, 9.5 million. We combined paving, roofing, sidewalk, masonry, about 7.4 million. Cafeteria improvements, 6.3 million. And you could see the rest of the dollars that are associated there in terms of type of request. The one thing that I noted at the bottom of this slide is that we, on the Board of Ed side, the planning committee of the board has begun looking at, are there capital budget requests that we have that we can combine and possibly execute another energy performance contract? And I'll give you an example. You know, Doolittle School, we need about $2.8 million. It's in the capital budget request for windows, $3 million for a roof replacement, about $7 million for HVAC, and that would be to do a full-fledged HVAC improvement, including air conditioning in that building. So that's about $12.5 million. In the process of doing the roof, though, you know, it might give us an opportunity to add solar onto the roof and reduce our energy costs. So if we bundle those 3 items as an example, and then add an energy savings component, some of the energy savings would offset the cost of funding those infrastructure improvements. We have quite a bit of work to do around that, but that is something that we're exploring to try and make the improvements that we need, you know, more palatable from a financing point of view. There are some very aggressive solar incentives that were really just announced. We don't have all the details, but in the past, solar incentives, you know, went to taxable corporations. And so if you were a non-tax corporation like the school district is, you really couldn't get those incentives. But now those incentives are going to be cash incentives, so we could take advantage of some of those opportunities. And there are other grant opportunities that might take place with these improvements. We're exploring all of those and don't have any detail other than we're in the exploratory stage to try and make these improvements happen quicker and fund them in a more acceptable manner. I did talk to Mr. Kimball, our town manager, about if we're going to go down the road of doing another energy performance contract or a similar financing structure, can we include some of the town buildings and do a second look at that? It doesn't cost us much to explore. In fact, the company that we used, ECG Engineering, when we did that first energy performance contract, they have an arrangement with CCM, the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities, and they will provide review services at no cost to the community. So we have a relationship with them. We are still a customer of theirs. So we are going to be talking to them in a couple of weeks and seeing if we could take this to the next step. So there's more coming on that, hopefully. So that was the 5-year capital request, 52.3 million. The funding requested, the first year request is this 3.79 million that's on the screen. And this is for those categories that you could see, some HVAC work, window replacements, you know, roofing, sidewalk masonry, some interior and out exterior grounds improvements, floor ceiling tile and door replacements, 400,000, continuing to work on improving district labs, 250,000, and 175,000 in code compliance. This is just a snapshot of the detail that's provided in the capital budget. I know that we're not deliberating yet on this. There is a lot of detail here. I did want to point out there's 2 things that I think are important on this slide. The third yellow highlighted box that has district-wide projects, elementary classroom expansion, buildings and improvements, $300,000. What that is, we engaged through the Board of Ed a study to be done by Antonazzi Associates, because we know we're going to run out of room at Doolittle and Highland before the new elementary schools are built. You know, it's inevitable. We're tight now. So we hired Antonazzi to look at the interior of those two buildings and determine, is there some way that we can reallocate, repurpose some of the space that we haven't already repurposed, because we've done some of that. And also, can we site portable classrooms on those properties, and where would we put them, and how many could we fit? So that is well underway. We should have in a couple of weeks the results of that study with an estimate of probable costs. So the $300,000 that we've added to the capital budget request for funding, you know, would be to fund, I think at Highland first, probably some portable classrooms to be added. That, you know, that looks like the likely outcome of this study. Also in year two, which we're not requesting funding for, we added another $250,000 for the same expansion. We recognize that it's a temporary scenario, so, you know, as a group, we wouldn't want to expend a lot of funding on something that's temporary, but we need to do something. So that's what that line item is about. And then I just flipped pages here. The top item, Dodd Middle School boiler replacement. The Park Place is the newer portion of Dodd Middle School. There are two boiler plants that are failing in that particular space, unfortunately. So we need to do this rather quickly. You know, we do have a design firm engaged. You know, normally we do plan out for when we need to do boiler replacements years in advance, but these kind of came up quickly. So that's part of this year's funding request. This is just a summary of the last 10 years of the capital expenditure. This is the actual money that's been approved. And you could see as we got into the later years, the funding rate has been pretty aggressive, about 80%. You know, as we look back to 2013, 14, you know, the funding approvals were lighter. But this is a good trend for us, and we need to continue to invest in these buildings, especially the ones that we know we're keeping. Just a quick update is the purpose of this particular slide. There is a building maintenance CNR fund. We call it the emergency fund. We have $233,627 in that fund. The last time we had to access it was in 2019 to make some emergency repairs to our underground storage tanks. So that money does sit there. The council does have to approve use of it, but it's a little bit of a safety net for maintenance purposes. And this is kind of the wrap up that, you know, the maintenance needs, which we fund out of our operating budget. I mean, they're constant. You know, some of these things on the top left side is just a small portion of the greenhouse at Cheshire High School that we had to shore the thing up. It really is in bad shape. So, you know, we'll get another year or two before we have to demolish it, but it's not ADA accessible and it's no longer used. So that will be coming down at some point. You know, that middle slide on the top, we had a down pole at the bus depot. You know, we deal obviously with graffiti. That middle bottom one is a raccoon that these raccoons have been invaded our buses to get warm over the winter. So we have to deal with that. And then, you know, the bottom right was just a leak that we had at one of the boilers. So our operating budget, you know, is dedicated to do those types of improvements, you know, and these are the investments that we make out of our capital budget. So that top shot is kind of a panoramic view of the Dodd Middle School roof, which the town council last year approved $450,000 to basically replace that portion of the roof. You know, Dodd's roof system, about 75% of it, you know, has been replaced, which puts us in really good shape in that building. It was needed. That roof was leaking pretty badly. So that was a really good project that came in under budget. That middle, you know, parking lot shot, that's the repaved Doolittle parking lot. Again, all paid for out of the capital budget. And the bottom left is the Dodd Middle School main boilers that, that have been cleaned up and worked on. So that boiler plant and that boiler room looks real good. And that bottom right is the East Gym. That is not a new floor. We just, went in there and we refurbished the floor. The picture doesn't do it justice. It just looks amazing. So, the money that we do invest in our schools, not only extend their life and make them, safer and healthier for our students, but they also, look good to the extent you see them, right? Nobody's going to see the roof. Nobody's going to see the boiler plant, but they do see the parking lot paving and they do see, our gyms when they're made much better than they were previously. And so that wraps up my piece. As I said, it was shorter than Dr. Solon's. And with that, we can open it up to questions.
All right.
Do you want to, if there are any questions that directly reference a slide, would we want to just keep the screen
Yeah.
down for a quick minute?
We could do that.
We could go.
Yeah, I think we could get it up so that we could all see.
great.
Because we have it written here anyway, so
Great.
that would be better.
Thank you.
Could you grab my PowerPoint, pretty please?
Paper?
If they reference a slide, and I realize I left it. Thanks.
Thank you for your presentation. Very thorough and entertaining with some of the nice parts in there. It is our biggest budget. It's sobering that it is a lot of money, but it's one of the most important things that we do is educate our children. So that's very important. Couple of overall questions. Obviously, your budget, you started putting it together, December, January. Board adopted it months ago. I always ask, and just wondering, and you may not have the answer right now, but we're looking for updates as we move through the process, is what do you have for updates over the last couple of months? Because there were some new numbers that you've gotten, maybe some teacher retirements. You didn't plan any in there, and there's usually some that, can be known, and then medical benefits, and then others, insurance numbers and things like that. We've got till the end of the month till we actually adopt, but it'd be nice if we had some updated numbers next week or the week after.
Sure. I mean, I
Some
could
now.
share immediately in the sense that I think we have 2 teacher retirements projected or officially, submitted. We generally have about 6, and normally, we would see a little bit of flexibility there. Unfortunately, what we've seen is a real dearth of candidates, and I think that's fairly well publicized across Connecticut that there's been a shortage where I could pretty much always count on if we had an elementary classroom opening that I could hire somebody on the first 2-3 steps of the schedule, and I could project that fairly confidently. The openings that we have right now are special ed driven, the 2 retirements that we already have. I am not super confident that we're going to make up. I'm not confident, let alone super confident, that we're going to make up savings when we hire those people without substantially compromising our threshold for quality, which obviously nobody wants to do. So, where I would typically turn to that is a strategy or a hope for savings. I'm not confident this year that I would realize that. In terms of other items, Vin can talk on more of the operational stuff.
Thank you. So I do have a couple of updates. I think mostly these will offset each other. Pension retirement, we budgeted an increase of $20,000. However, it was an assumption that we used that we would keep the 7% return rate. If we drop that to 6.75, I'm not sure the $20,000 will cover that. I know that's a decision yet to be made. Our insurance lines, though.
Not to leave that item.
Yeah.
When you do get to that update, assume we're going to go with 6.75 so we can see what your number would be.
I rely on Jim for the actual
Right,
number.
yes,
number,
yeah.
So. Our insurance lines, I know that HC Seeger was pretty conservative with the dollars that they asked us to budget, we didn't budget up much. It was only a couple of $1,000 increase total, but to the extent that we get final numbers from HDC, or we may have a little bit of pickup. On the maintenance lines, we increased our budget by 14% for public utilities, mostly electricity. Kind of the good news is that we were able to lock electricity through November. We're at about 9 cents per kilowatt hour. I've got exposure though from November till June. We're shopping, we have a consultant that is very good. Actually, the town uses the same consultant. So it's a $155,000 increase. We're probably going to be able to mitigate some of that. And, depending on, where we wind up with the actual electricity costs we lock in, that does represent an opportunity. Heat and energy, up until OPEC, decided that they were going to decrease production this week, I think we were looking pretty good. We budgeted for about a 34% increase in that line. I think we probably can come off that if we get a little bit of easing. I know the price of oil went from $74, $75 a barrel. Well, now, back over 80, unfortunately. So I know there's nothing substantial here. It might be a little give and take depending on what happens, with the impact of pension.
All right. Couple other questions. On page 12, I'm looking at $898,000 in ESSER funds that appear to be available through September of next year. Am I reading that correctly?
Page 12 of the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yeah. So
I'm sorry. Yeah, I don't know what it is of yours because it didn't show those little numbers, but the
The
second
update-
slide on page
Yeah, I'll
12.
give an update on that because we'll use about 50% of that this year,
Mhm.
22, 23, and the remaining 50% through the end of next year. I know that expires September of 2024. We're going to use it by June of 2024, and that will be used to fund the salaries of 4 people. So we, are pretty tight on that.
So you've already earmarked that.
Yeah.
That's not something that could be used for the behavior specialist or the speech path or some of the other items that you requested for
No.
additional staffing. What are the
It's a
what are
good
the
thought,
4
David, but
yeah.
it's already
What are
accounted for those 4 people that are included.
what are the positions? What are those?
It's a
Okay, the principal, the half, and then the full, and then the
it's a
okay.
reading and math
sorry, thank you.
specialist.
That it's funding
Math
for
coach.
this year. Okay,
It's 4 people that are funding, that
right.
800.
and then you've got the money available.
And
for
there
the next
was,
school year
just
after.
to kind of give you the full scope, we did use 126,000 of that 898 for the tents that we had to put up last fall.
Yeah.
So, but the rest of it is just cover salaries.
All right, and then putting all this together, bigger picture for a minute, putting all this together, we're not going to have support in the community for a 1.7 million increase. That isn't happening. And that means we're going to be sharing together all the departments and looking for ways and revenue enhancements. So part of it is going to be we're probably going to have to share in some of the reduction in available expenditures here, and maybe if there's some other revenue. I don't have a number yet. I don't know what's comfortable. We've got to talk to the community, but 1.7 is not going to fly.
Yeah, I
But-
think that's where, we started with 500,000 in
Right.
on that, in that effort.
Yeah, because it would have been 1.9
Yeah.
if you hadn't
Yeah,
given
right.
if the Board of Ed had, and you folks hadn't given that. So we are going to have to talk, once we get your updates, we are going to have to talk about ranges of, if we were to reduce your request by $500,000 or reduce it by more or less, whatever, what's the impact of
Yeah,
that? So
right.
we're going to have to talk about that as we get through the next couple of weeks while we deliberate once we finish seeing all the last of the departments on Thursday. So keep that in mind. Don't have a number yet. I don't want to spend a lot of time on the capital budget, but just briefly, the Green Bank is getting very active, in Connecticut, and that may be a place that you can go for some of those, put some of the projects together, and especially with the energy component of it. That may be, they're getting more active about being able to have funds available for governmental entities to be able to work with. So that may work.
Yeah, we're certainly actively pursuing those sort of alternative funding opportunities. with the substantial growth in our elementary enrollment and the mental health needs of
Mhm.
society today, we just submitted a grant for 2 school counselors at the elementary grades rather than try and tap into operating funds. So we're certainly trying to pursue alternatives, and we'll continue to look at anything that could offset this operational proposal.
Okay. All right. Just so the rest of the council knows what I'm thinking, and hopefully we all agree and want to go down this road. We're really concentrating on operating budget right now. We'd like to do some of the capital stuff, but I think we've got time to have a capital budget discussion with the Board of Ed long before we have to adopt items. But the presentation is here and it's all in here, so we can ask questions as we want. So I'll open up to others that have questions if there are. You're all, Sandy's hands up first. Former Board of Ed member.
Yes, when I was going through the budget, I noticed that you changed from Blue Cross to Cigna on the medical employee benefits. Did the town of Cheshire get any benefit from that in savings? I would imagine that it did, because it probably is less money. So can you explain that?
I'll talk a little bit, and I'll talk about both the town and Board of Ed side, because we do work together with the medical benefits. Town and Board of Ed both have Cigna. So the savings that we picked up when we moved to Cigna basically comes from the fees that we pay for the processing of our claims. So on the Board of Ed side, we were, paying roughly $400,000 per year. Those fees are about $240,000 a year now. So that's where we picked up savings. We also picked up additional revenue in the form of drug rebates. Cigna has been a lot more generous, but it was also contractual that they committed to a certain level of drug rebates. And those have more than doubled, and I'm going to use round numbers. On the board side, we're upwards of $400,000 per year in drug rebates. It was, half of that with Anthem. The other thing that Cigna has provided is wellness funds that are shared between the board and the town side. And they've been really generous. We're $55,000 a year is where they started, and we're at around $80,000 a year. And although I can't correlate the health and wellness efforts that we've made, and we've made a lot to reduce claims, we could not really measure that, although we try to. Those do help us, and we've been promoting health and wellness in a very positive way with our employees. They also provide the services 3 days a week of a health coach that's available to the employees, who participates in the health and wellness fairs that we do. We're doing a hydration challenge right now across town and schools. We're doing a walking challenge right now. And the health coach is part of that, in addition to taking individual appointments. Unfortunately, claims are claims. So, the trend, especially on the school side for the last 3 years, we've had relatively high claims, higher than we, certainly had budgeted originally. A lot of that is coming from people getting sick, cancer, heart disease, a lot of a bone joint, that needs to be replaced. And so, we've been working, with Cigna to try, everything we can to try and get the claims down. But, whether we are with Anthem or Cigna, whatever the claims are, we pay for those. It's just the services that, that's where we picked up the savings.
Just like to follow up on that. Are the claims higher than average over the course of several years? Or is it the cost of the services that are inflating the dollars that we're spending?
It's a combination of those two things. I will tell you that claims of 25,000 and up for the last 3 years have definitely increased in terms of frequency, the number of claims, and the dollar amount of those claims has also increased. So there's no doubt there's an increase in that component. And then the costs of services, those are increasing. So that's part of what's in that mix for the 25,000 and over claims, but also the claims that are below that threshold. The cost of prescription drugs, and, I know that Mr. Kimball might have presented on this, but the cost of prescription drugs, because of all the new brands and breeds and types of drugs, can be very expensive. In fact, that is the largest percentage increase in the cost to the town and Board of Ed for claims that's budgeted next year.
And it is still to our benefit to self-fund our claims instead of going out to have it managed by an insurance company.
Well, so if we're self-insured now, if we
Right.
went fully insured, it's still, claims are still going to be claims. And
Right,
so there's, what we have right now is transparency
Right,
as
okay.
to what those claims are. If we tried to get a fully insured rate, which we have in the past, it's probably going to increase our costs and decrease our transparency. But it's always an option that can be explored. If it makes you feel any better, there's a lot of communities that have gone onto the state health plan, and that's because it's more cost effective for them. We're not at that threshold. If, even on a per employee basis, we're below, what the state plan would charge. And the state plan, they had their largest increase ever last year, something like 10.5%, to their members.
Well, residents have to understand that, because if they're not insured through the town because they're employees here, they're all dealing with it. All of us are dealing it in personal, so.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I did ask for a quote on that. I'm waiting to hear back from our consultant as to, potential for fully insured, how much that would potentially cost, more or less. I was told that for employers in excess of 200 employees, 80% self-insured, just as a statistic. So I think, between town and Board of Ed, we probably have in excess of 800, I think.
Employees that are on the plans? Yeah, close to that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Manlone. And then David.
Thank you. Thank you, Vin and Dr. Solon, for the presentation. It was very, very helpful, and appreciate everything you do. It's so important. Education is so important in the community. But as our budget chair said, we are concerned about the increases that we're looking at this year, and we're going to be looking to do whatever we can to pull that back. So I'm curious about a couple of things. Could you explain to me a little greater detail? Because class size seems to drive a lot of the expenses that maybe we can control, which is basically our salaries. And we've got a class size for our younger children, 18 per class. Then we've got another size for our 7th and 8th graders. I didn't hear the class size for the high school students. Maybe that's not an applicable apples and apples comparison. But how important is that? Because I would like to that's something that when you looked at your budget, Dr. Solon, you didn't waive on that. You took away instructional materials and things like that, but you didn't waiver on that. So I'd like to see whether there's flexibility there.
Yeah, it's a really good question, Councilman Malone. I think where that really stems from is about 3 or 4 years ago. It was definitely pre-COVID. I think we all had the time warp. Maybe it was 5 years ago. Mr. Grippo, myself, we had a committee of a lot of families, a lot of parents in the community. We started to go through this work around personalized learning and, what are the key factors for our families? What do they think are mission critical? And it was pretty much universal without outside of that group in the broader community, parent community. And within that group, that class size was, in their eyes, the non-negotiable, do not move. And I think as much as our class sizes have crept up, actually, since that time, we still really try and hold to that as much as we possibly can.
So why is it okay to have a larger class size in the 7th and 8th grade? Just out of curiosity.
It's not, I wouldn't call it, quote, okay. I would say that the middle school with teaming, it's not like I can add one teacher, because those classes are really certification driven differently. It grades 7 through 12 than they are K through 6. So K through 6 is more of a generalist, if you will, where the middle school, when I have a 4-teacher team, I have to have somebody who's English language arts certified, math, science, social studies certified. There's probably a special educator in there. And if I add just one teacher, it doesn't work with the way that we educate kids. It would reduce maybe the English class size, but not necessarily do anything for the other class sizes. I have to add a team of 2 people that's dual certified in 2 content areas. Usually we'll find people that are English social studies certified, maybe math science certified, and that will reduce the class sizes. So it's really, we're right at that threshold where if I'm adding people to push the class size down at the middle school, I'm adding 2 people at each grade, which, when we evaluated that from a fiscal perspective, we're here now going, how do we do this?
Mhm.
If we added 4 more positions,
So we have educational specs for the 2 new elementary schools.
Right.
What class size are we accommodating in the construction of those schools?
for square footage, we follow what the
And
ed specs are.
what are the ed specs
Say-
based it on?
We based it on 18 students
And
per
that's for
class at elementary.
size,
So that's
for
the
the
state,
building size.
so the state requires that we base it on 18 students?
No, that's what we used to project how many classrooms we would need at each grade in the elementary schools.
So they're going to be designed to accommodate 18 students. So if we have 20 students in a classroom, they will be out of space in those?
No, the classrooms will be big enough, so it's not that you can't fit 20 or 21 or 23 students in the elementary classrooms. But for purposes of designing the building, we use.
Number of classrooms.
Right.
Yeah, that's how we backed into it. Now, I'll just add a little bit, the 18.8 this year and next year, that's overall for the elementary. If you look, and it is in the budget book under the enrollment section, I know there's a ton of data
Yeah,
in there.
yeah.
But at the kindergarten level, our average is about 17.1. At 6th grade for next year, it's 20.7. So the general management of a classroom, the younger grades with the smaller children, you want to try and keep those class sizes smaller. As you go up in grade, it's okay to have those classes bigger. And then I'm just looking like grade 6 for next year, Doolittle, we're talking 22, 23 students per class, based on the projections. Highlands about 20, Norton's between 20 and 21. That's at 6th grade. But then if you look at kindergarten, we're 17, 18, except for Norton, where we've got classes of 15 and 16. So there is that general classroom management, the older
I understand.
students.
It's not going to be perfect distribution. So we have a population projected for next year of 4,201 students overall. Is that what you said?
Correct.
And then what is the current population?
Sure.
As
There's
of
about,
October 1, it was 4,160.
I could pull up my computer and give you
Just-
what it
just
is
curious.
We're
today.
over that.
But no, you're not over the 4,201 yet.
But was,
We may be close. I can pull it really quick.
No, you don't have, I'm just curious how accurate the projection is and whether it's people that have already, whether it's based on assumptions as to new students, or you've already got those many students committed to next year. And, how accurate is the projection?
the 1-year projections are fairly accurate, but that doesn't mean they're going to be accurate at every school.
Mhm.
So we do adjust as we get into August, and you'll be surprised how many students enroll late August, people moving into the community or moving into a new house or buying someone else's house. So, we really finalize these at the end of August, but we adjust. And, we don't have quite as many kids at Norton, but we have more kids at Doolittle. That's kind of one of the phenomena that happened this year. We'll just move a teacher from one building to
So
another
you
from
can't,
one grade.
you can't change where the kids go to school at the last minute. Okay.
But I would say these are pretty good relative to what we would expect to see next year. And there is, we know there's a lot of construction going on. So some of the growth is based on population, new births that occurred 5 years ago. But for every child that's born in Cheshire, we get 1.5 kindergarten students enrolled. And then you have people moving into town and with children in different grades. So
Yeah, as of today, we have 4,273 students enrolled.
4,273.
and that's,
So how,
that includes open choice?
It does include
So
open
it's
choice. Then that's,
30,
I can give you, it's
roughly
roughly
30.
30 students.
so the projection for next year is less students than we currently have.
Correct.
How do you justify that?
Well, we work with it when that happens. And sometimes, certainly there have been times where as we get closer to opening school in the fall, we say, well, we have no choice here. We have to add another teaching position. And we, take the money budgeted and we had to make adjustments throughout the course of the year.
But just remember, that's over
it's over the
13
course of
grades,
13
over
grades.
7 buildings. So
Yeah, they're not all in one
Sounds
room,
like a lot, but-
obviously, the difference, but
No, I understand. I don't
it
understand
happens. It
Yeah.
definitely happens. It's a
how the
fair
overall
question.
number would be less than what we already have unless we're seeing.
because the
exits.
projections start, with what the actual enrollment was as of October 1. And that's, the company that we use, NESDEC, projects based on that, based on the births, based on, trends that we've seen in past years. And, people are just, moving in rather quickly to the community, which is a good thing. Hence the need to find some space in at least 2 of the buildings. If I only had a crystal ball, I could be a lot more precise.
So the NESDEC, the New England School Development Council, just sent us an updated enrollment, which has us at 4,252 projected for next year, which is closer to where we are. And theirs is really grounded on birth rate almost exclusively. They don't do what SLAM or before them, Mylone and McBroom did
Yeah.
to evaluate the construction in the community, stuff like that. So their updated was 4,252 for 23-24, just came in. That's about where we are right now if you back out students, open choice students. And our open choice student population, as much as it's 30 students, a lot of open choice students, we added additional seats at Cheshire High School.
What is open choice?
Open Choice is a program in Connecticut that allows students in urban communities to enter a lottery to attend schools in suburban communities. So our program, Open Choice, runs through New Haven. Students who reside in New Haven can enter a lottery to attend our schools here where we have available seats. Most of our available seats are at Cheshire High School, and we draw about $3,000 per student on those, so which we and then put back into programs. For example, this year we have a former Cheshire High School student, a Black male who did not have a teaching certification. We know we desperately need teachers. We'd like to diversify our staff. He's going through a program right now where he's working in our schools every day, and that money pays for that while he becomes a certified teacher. So next year we'll hire him as a certified teacher. We have the demand, obviously, so it's a win-win for us. So that's just one of the ways that we try and leverage our resources to provide for for the school experience. But in terms of our enrollment, as Vin just said, it's really interesting to see how quickly it's grown. I know, it took us a decade to reach that trough, and we're like springboarding off of it, which is it's a blessing and a curse.
I acknowledge Mr. Walsh first and then Mr. Belper, okay?
Thank you, guys. I have a lot of questions that I wrote notes on. If I could read my notes, I mean, first and foremost, I do have a question before I hit numbers. You know, we're a couple years out of the pandemic. How have the students recovered? How have the teachers recovered in terms of, are they back to where they were pre-COVID, or are they still? I know that there's a lot of mental health issues with a lot of that stuff too as well. But my main concern is, we hear a lot, students have lost a lot because of those 2 years, year and a half, 2 years. You guys did a tremendous job in keeping the schools open, but we all know online learning is not the easiest. So I just was curious.
Yeah. First of all, I really appreciate the question. In this format, it can be really easy to focus in on the numbers, and there are real kids and families behind these numbers. And the pandemic, frankly, the online learning component of it, I don't know that was the biggest challenge. I think the social isolation and challenges that we did a lot as a community to ameliorate the impact of those things, but they're real. And we see more mental health and behavioral issues in Cheshire and in Connecticut than we ever have. That's been a real challenge. I mean, that's why we're going out looking for 2 new school counselors through that grant. From an instructional and educational space, there are gaps that are obvious, when we made that switch. Now, granted, we were handing out computers day one, and the impact that we've felt in this community pales in comparison to most in Connecticut. But it's different to teach a student how to, solve algebra equations on a computer when you've never had to do that before. And so there was a learning curve for our kids, our staff, that we've done everything we can to close the gap, but there are still, areas where we feel it, and we're working really hard. That's why we invested a lot of money in professional development and supporting our students. The first place where we invested money was something we call acceleration. And I think from a layperson just sitting back and thinking acceleration, does that mean we teach faster? No. What we've done is really identify what are the core components of each unit, of each grade, and really focus on those, and what skills do kids need to be successful on those core pieces. Because if our plan was to go back and reteach everything that kids have missed over a year and a half, they would always be a year and a half behind. So we really focused on grade level content, grade level performance, and I think we're closing the gap pretty quickly. We're just administering the Smarter Balance assessments in the next couple of weeks. We'll get a better sense of where do we stand relative to everybody else, but our internal data shows that our students are making strong growth.
That's
because we've focused on that PD, right, and we've added those positions like the math coaching and the reading and math specialists to support that.
And I don't think it's lost by anyone up here that there are real faces when we're looking at these numbers.
Yeah.
And I think, that's what concerns us, because
right, yeah,
many of us have had children who have gone through the schools or are going through the schools, and we want to make sure they're getting the best education they can. And you guys are providing that, and I appreciate it. A couple of questions about, I saw there's roughly a 41 student increase for next year you're projecting, yet you're hiring 5 teachers and 1 special ed teacher. 41 students, does that include the?
That's net K-12.
Okay.
All the hires we're making are at the elementary grades.
Okay.
And that's, net 76. And that's, as Mr. Milone just pointed out, over the projected.
Does that include special ed students as well?
It does.
It does. Okay. So when we hear the numbers 4,200, whatever. That includes special ed students, the 620 something
Sure.
special ed students we
And
have.
I've heard, people suggest that Cheshire does a tremendous job providing special education resources. And so people move here for special education and things like that. I'm sure that there are some families who are very considerate of special education services when they move to Cheshire, but the data doesn't show us that like 50% of the students who move in receive special education services. That's not accurate. The data shows us that 15% of the families who move in require special education services. In essence, identical to what we already have in our student population. So it's, we've looked at a variety of different factors that impact us financially in terms of who's moving in, who's moving out. It's kind of
And I actually had somebody ask me, well, why are there so many more, special ed or, spectrum kids on special needs kids?
Sure.
And I said, because our diagnosis has gotten better is my thinking. You would know better than we could diagnose these kids at a younger age, which would help them mature into, normal working adults that they can do things that, years ago we couldn't do. So I don't know if that's accurate or not, if they're just better medicines and better.
Yeah, I think you're probably onto something with respect to the earlier diagnosis, but I also think that there's a better awareness among families about providing interventions and supports to students, and that's again, it's not a Cheshire phenomenon. It's a statewide because the state percentages grow as well. So our I think what we're incredibly proud of is the fact that when our numbers, about 6 years ago, our rank in Connecticut as it relates to the Smarter Balanced Performance was 36th. We're now 11th. And when you look at our special education students as its own segment, they're that high as well. So our success wasn't, it didn't leave students that are identified behind. Those students made substantial growth as well, and we're really proud of that.
A couple more things. I see that the substitute teacher number went up, and I know that you said 35%. You're paying Kelly Services 35% because it's probably a lot easier for them to get you substitutes than that. But I noticed that you give $110 a day for certified teachers and $105 for non-certified, which I don't know. It doesn't sound like a big difference in my opinion. But I also noticed that I know for a fact that there are substitutes that don't even have complete college degrees that are going into some of the schools, and I always thought that there were at least a 4-year degree on that. But I think that they're not getting paid enough, but I hate to say that in front of when we're trying to cut here. But the 35% kind of bothers me that we have to pay 35% to the Kelly Services.
Go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say is the cost that we pay to Kelly, we would incur internally to have to hire
Somebody to do that.
manage those people. And are we paying a bit of a premium to Kelly? I think we are.
Do you know how much you paid Kelly last year? Just out of curious. Was it over 100,000 or?
More like $800,000.
But they pay the substitutes
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
So you're
Pay them
talking about
$800, so-
talking about the delta between
so-
the money that goes to
So
the
35% of 800,000 is what? Yeah. So that's a lot of money. So, one other. I know we saw the audit on the athletic fee thing, and I appreciate you guys getting that to us. The one thing that I didn't see in there was still when groups give cash donations, whether it's the Gridiron Club gives a cash donation to the athletic department, or if they're selling those cards, for football or lacrosse, and that all that money, is that all part of the student fee, or is that a separate athletic fund that you guys?
So there's two separate buckets, if you will.
Uh-huh.
When you mention the athletic fee, that's money that basically is funneled back into offset the cost of the operations for athletics. Then there's, booster clubs and everything like that. Booster clubs are their own entity that operate outside of the school system. They will collect money from their parents or whatever. They tell us what to spend that money on. If they are giving us money, they will say, we want to hire an assistant coach above and beyond what the Cheshire Public Schools operating budget provides. We're going to pay that person identical to what the other assistant coach pays. They'll give us the money, we pay the coach.
Is that part of the budget?
No, because it's not, we don't include that in our operations. If families want to do that and teams want to do that,
Okay.
those are really parent decisions from those different athletic programs that make that call. Sometimes it's equipment, oftentimes it's equipment. Sometimes it's a coach, like I just mentioned,
Mhm.
but that's not part of our budget. There's no money that comes in to subsidize, and what you see is what you get through our budget.
All right, so basically they'll give you money, and if they don't tell you what to use it for, then the coaches and.
Well, they don't give us money. They don't give us the money
They-
if they don't tell us what to use it for.
Okay, all right, so that's how it works.
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah. Then anything you want to add to that?
Everything is accounted for very
Yeah.
precisely in sub-accounts. We have at the high school, because that's really the question, we have about 100 sub-accounts. There's generally one for every athletic team. There's one for guidance because students do pay for, certain services that we provide that then gets expended. Gridiron, it's its own entity. So if Gridiron is doing a fundraiser, they manage those funds. We don't see that unless they're making a specific, request. And like the ones that I know of with Gridiron, they'll pay to clean the football uniforms,
Right.
for example. So either they'll write a check, directly,
Okay,
or if we're paying for it, they'll write a check and it'll come in and then it'll go out to pay for the cleaning of uniforms. But
All right.
there's not really a cash.
no, I get it. I
Isn't
just
targeted.
was a little confused on that, but you clarified it for me, so I appreciate that.
Sure.
And thank you guys, I appreciate it. That's all for me.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh.
Thank you very much. Just a couple quick questions to follow up on some things, but thank you again for your presentation tonight. It's always good to see where these things are going because obviously the kids and the education is so important in Cheshire. And as I think for all of us, it's important to make sure that we educate the kids. That's one of the things that people really appreciate about Cheshire and what it can do. Just a quick question for you. Speaking of special education, I think you mentioned about average cost for special education was about $33,000 per child, and then our per child expenditure, I think it was about 16 or 18 on the slide. Was it
18.
18? So is that just for clarification? When you say 33 for a normal special education child, is that 18? The difference between 33, 18? You include the 18 in that 33, or is it 33?
It's not 33 plus 18.
Okay,
If that's what you're asking.
Yeah, that's
The total cost is 33.
So it's 18 plus extra to get to 33,
Yeah,
give or take.
exactly,
Okay,
15 or
that's what I thought it was. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't something like 51,000 for. Just a couple quick questions. One is Cynthia mentioned we were talking. Sylvia had mentioned the issue. We're talking about the medications and stuff like that. Is there any way to, and I think the state may have done this, but we may not be able to. Are there certain expensive medications that we could say, we're sorry, we're not going to allow you to get those medications on the plan? If they're so either sort of experimental or so abnormally expensive. I'm just curious, is there a way to say, we're really sorry, but that's just, that's too experimental for us to be paying for? I think the state did that with some things a few years ago because they were doing that. I just wasn't sure if that's something that we could look into.
There are the prescription coverage that's provided, and it is through Cigna, both on the town and the Board of Ed side. We did have a third party at one point that was managing it. And they operate on basically three lists. There's, formulary and non-formulary. So the drug has to be on the list. If it's not on the list, then if it's prescribed, it's not covered. However, and there are cases where the coverage is denied for a particular drug because it's being prescribed for a use that's not approved. And so that does occur. But I will tell you, in many cases, somebody that's undergoing a cancer treatment, that's a drug that's approved for cancer, and so it doesn't get denied. We do, because we're all on high deductible health plans for the most part. I mean, most of our staff in the schools, and I think just about all the staff on the town side, are in a high deductible health plan. So it's to the members' benefit to try and find the lowest drug cost for common drugs that you would buy over the counter at CVS. But, typically where the large expenses are when someone needs a prescription related to significant disease. And we do talk to Cigna. They have, recommendations that they make that we implement every year to try and do step therapy, where someone uses the generic before they go to the brand name, which is certainly, much less expensive. It's an ongoing management that, we work with Cigna and we work with USI. I think many of you have met Tom Kowalczyk, who's our representative from USI. He's our broker.
Okay, well, thank you. I was just curious on that because I know, obviously, we want to make sure that we're limiting that to the extent that we can. But obviously, if it's on the approved list and people are needed for what they are being prescribed for, that I understand that. That's fine. Going back to the slides on 12, and this is the 4 positions that you were hiring using the ESSER grant. So I guess my question is, okay, so what happens when those funds run out? But by now you're used to having principal support and a full-time elementary reading and math specialist and high school and middle school math support teachers and you're utilizing in that program. So 2 years from now, there's no funding for that anymore because you've run out of ESSER. What happens in that situation? You have to then either decide to try to put them back in the budget or cut them. And so, I mean, the other thing, and one of those things is obviously right now the principal support at Doolittle and Norton, but also at Chapman. So obviously that particular person, if they were to continue on, obviously Chapman and Norton will not be there. Is there expectation that they will continue at the new schools? That position would be, I mean, what is your administrative viewpoint looking at when we go to these 2 new schools? Do you think you need more administrators when we have the newest schools? We have less administrators, the same number of administrators. When we have these 2 new schools in, are there people just going to be sort of moved around? Or I'm just trying to get a feel for, are we looking, when we have the 2 new schools, are we going to be looking at more administrators that are going to need to, to populate these 2 new schools?
So, we would obviously have to evaluate at that time. And I know you're asking me to kind of peer into the future with the best that I can. And not that any of us could predict with 100% certainty. But I would imagine that there would be some contraction, whether it's administratively in other places when we consolidate into 2 buildings. I don't know that it would be dramatically, again, if we're looking at ratios, it's probably not going to be dramatically different. But I could anticipate some contraction.
Okay. Because I mean, I'd be just curious if there was going to need to be more, like right now you've got part-time at Norton and a part-time at Chapman, and whether you were thinking you were going to need now maybe perhaps a full-time assistant principal at each of these 2 new schools.
What I can say with some certainty is that when we consolidate, let's call it Chapman and Darcy come together, the program at Darcy is so incredibly unique, addressing the needs of significant developmental needs from birth to K, is, a very unique skill set, different than general education at 5th grade. So I could see those 2 principals, assuming that they're still with us in 2026, working in that same building but I think that given this relative size of that younger population, that administrator would probably carry a greater load of early elementary grades. So I see those two administrative positions coming together. And if there is any contraction, it would probably be with assistant support there that would happen.
Thank you very much. And
Sure.
just two other quick questions. One is, obviously you have a lot of IAs and what's going on. Are you using any temporary employees or like consultants for anything? Do you use a lot of consultants for things in the?
We use consultants, through our ARP money, through the federal money. I mean, that's where the PD has really come into play, where we've brought in coaching. Really, in one case, the support district-wide, the our SCL initiative, and so that's going to go away when the federal money goes away. But we, fully know that. I mean, when I say we really looked at Bounce Forward, how do we improve the capacity of the organization when the money runs out? Because if we hired a whole bunch of people, and we'd be facing a massive fiscal cliff, and when those people left, we're not better organizationally for the experience. So we have invested in a lot of PD and that one consultant.
Okay, excellent. I appreciate that. And Celeste, I think Don had mentioned the issue of substitutes. And is the use of substitutes going up across the district? Or have you noticed a trend of using more substitutes? Are you seeing the use of more substitutes over the course of the whole district, or is it pretty typical right now?
I think we've been pretty typical. We're always trying to reduce the number of substitutes. There's a balance here between substitutes that are used for personal illness reasons and then professional reasons. So, we do pull out staff periodically for professional development. Unfortunately, this year, we really haven't had the opportunity to do much of that. Today, COVID is not an impact on us. I mean, I think we had one staff case all last week, or maybe, half dozen cases over the course of the month of March. Earlier in the year, though, when people are out for 5 days at a clip, I mean, that was impacting us. We're hopeful that as this year concludes and we move into next year, that our sub demand will not be what it was through the pandemic. And I would include the fall in that. There were points in October where we saw significant spikes in numbers that were concerning, and we'd have people out for 5 days. We are not experiencing that now. As a matter of fact, our assistant superintendent, Marlene, just talked about the fact that we had points this week where we were fully staffed with our substitutes, which had not been the case for years, frankly, where we'd have to pull people all over the place and do that. So I think the projection there is positive. It's an area where we've historically run over budget. But I'm hopeful that, things will settle in at this point now that the COVID is more behind us.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thanks, David. We're almost done, guys, I think. My first question is just kind of a general question having to do with your, on page 4, the per pupil numbers. I mean, you guys have shown this to us for a long time, I think, as far as the difference between our per pupil number and the state average. And, not only is the difference there between Cheshire and the state average, but even if you look at the growth over the years, our per pupil number is well below the state average. The growth is well below. I guess just what I'm wondering is, we have pretty good performance in our school systems, obviously very good performance. So what what kind of explains that? Our students aren't missing anything. Is that just our higher student teacher ratio, or what kind of explains that difference, that delta there?
To be humble, I'd say efficiency.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. You know, at the very top of the scale of those who spend the most, there are two common themes that run through that top of the scale. One is really small schools, like the really small districts that have a lot of overhead. They have big overhead, not a lot of kids. And so when you have literally several hundred kids in the district and you know, the overhead there just doesn't equate, right? So that's one theme that runs through the top. The other theme that runs through the top is Fairfield County, where they're, you know, paying a Fairfield County premium on everything, from staffing to food to whatever. Then you look at everybody else, and you know, if you look at DIRG B, which is our district reference group, only includes one, I think, is Newtown in Fairfield County. I'm not even sure, but you've got Newtown and Greenwich in that collective, but it's a lot of communities that we would look like, considered to be like Cheshire, Madison, Avon, Simsbury, and those folks spend more per student than we do. The similar size in most cases, and I think we're just really incredibly efficient in the results that we attain with the resources that we use. So I think when I have a panic attack over further reducing, you know, resources, it's grounded in how much can we squeeze, and I think we've worked really hard to try and do that. And I appreciate that we are not the only game in town. That there are many important resources that are necessary in this community. We are among that group, but that's, you know, I can turn to this, and unfortunately Sean probably doesn't have metrics that are so easily comparable like that we have. But I think it is really a testament to the efficiency that we have in the organization when you look at this metric in particular relative to the results that we receive or attain.
Maybe you guys should package that up and sell that to school districts. You know?
Yeah. So
My other questions have to do with
maybe if we do consulting, we can generate revenue.
Right, exactly. My other questions have to do with Chapman and Highland in particular. You mentioned Chapman, the new Stonebridge crossing. Those students are going to go to Chapman. I think that the consultant who looked at that development, I think they were saying we maybe would have 40 students out of that 140 units, if anyone remembers that. Which I'm
Off
skeptical.
The units off of Dickerman.
Right, off the 100,
Yeah,
off the 140,
exclusively.
that 140
Yeah,
development there. I was always skeptical of that. I'm still skeptical of that. I think that people are going to find a way to get into this town, and that's going to be one way. But given the 40 number, I mean, that's a little more than 2 classes, right, in Chapman, in a school that already doesn't have space. So are you going to be doing a study there as well as how we kind of reconfigure Chapman for a few
Yeah,
years?
couple of quick notes on that. I agree with you, Mr. Jinks. I've been accused of saying people don't move here for the nightlife more than once.
I've heard that a few times.
But yeah. But and I agree that people will be attracted to that opportunity to educate there without maybe having to buy a 4-bedroom colonial. If it's 40 students, I'm assuming a distribution in ages that won't be exclusively K-6. I mean, it could be,
Right.
and that would be more impactful. And like we were talking about the distribution of students before, if they all were 5th graders, we'd be in trouble. If they're distributed along that continuum of K-6, it's more manageable. And I think, unfortunately, there's a little bit of a wait and see. I do know that, if just looking at percentage of classroom space used, that I can't gamble that the distribution is going to work on our favor in Highland. I have a little bit more room to gamble at Chapman, but it is still going to be a wait and see, and fingers crossed that things fall in the right places. If not, that's what I talked about before in terms of putting people on carts. We just now commandeered the art room for 4th grade, and we're going to have to make do.
What does that mean exactly with the teachers on carts? I'm not sure I follow.
So if we need another classroom because the enrollment dictates is such, we would take, maybe there's a room right now that has several special educators in it, or an art class, and we take the art stuff out. We put art on a cart, and art goes to Mrs. Smith's first grade class today, and we're doing art in this room as opposed to in the art room. Unfortunately, just because we can't accommodate that. It's a possibility. It's a strong probability actually at Highland. It's a possibility at Chapman, I would say, this year.
Okay. And then as far as Highland goes, you're doing that study to see if we can reconfigure the building. But didn't we do a study of some kind when we were looking if we could move the Darcy students into Highland?
Sure. So what we looked at in that case was the plausibility of an addition and where that would work. And that was pretty resoundingly rejected by you guys, the building committee, everybody who looked at it, because it just didn't make sense. The work that we're doing right now is to say, well, all right, if we are moving any walls internally, if we're doing anything like that internally, could we generate some more classroom space? Beyond that, we're also exploring the addition of trailers at that location. And there are a real diversity of options when it comes to trailers. Anything from, we have a representative, one of the local vendors lives in Cheshire, and, she'll hit us up that, hey, this school had we got a used one on the market that we might be able to kind of work out. And we're exploring the different options that exist there. Vin knows this, way more than me, but the point is we're looking at how do we close the gap from 23 to 26 and make it work for the next few years.
Right. And then my last question about Highland too is, I think the projections for Highland was even after the schools were built, it was going to be in the 800 something range, right? No,
It's coming down.
it is.
Yeah, it's going to be close to that, but it won't be, from what I recall, north of 800 students.
Okay. I thought we were still going to be over 800.
650-ish at the two new buildings, and
Right.
I want to say 750 at Highland.
Is there at any point over the next year to two where we continue to see the growth we see, or maybe more, where we have to pull the trigger on expanding the footprint that we're anticipating for one of the new schools?
So, unfortunately, it's really tough to do that post architectural design, but it's not impossible, and it's not unprecedented. So South Windsor was literally adding classrooms during construction.
Right.
Our next enrollment study will occur in 2025, because we need to engage in that process at that time for redistricting for when the building's open. We're trying to strike a balance of providing enough advance notice. So, we have on our website now, for anybody who's watching, or if you're interested, a draft of redistricting that's available on the site, but it's very clearly marked that this is not the redistricting map, but it gives you a sense at least. Then in 2025, we'll have 2025 enrollment numbers, construction numbers, and we'll at that point engage in another study that'll tell us, all right, where are we now? We'll clearly get some canaries in the coal mine, if you will, in enrollment in the next few years to give us a sense of where things are trending, and can always intervene sooner. But in 2025, we'll do that study again they will then, the demographers will then lay out for us a redistricting map and be able to better tell us, like, you know, this is the projection. You may need more space at these new buildings, or, you know, at Highland or any place at Doolittle.
But that won't be till 2025, you're saying?
Correct. That's the next time it's scheduled. It doesn't mean that we can't do it sooner, obviously. That if we get to next January and the delta between the projection and our actual is so significant that, you know, we can certainly at that point, maybe we need to engage in this now.
Yeah.
Before
I mean,
actually we're digging in the ground.
I think we were anticipating the buildings, the design, and obviously this is maybe for the building committee, but that there be a relatively easy add-on
Yes.
at some sort of piece of the building, you know, if we needed it, kind of thing.
And we have talked about, I mean, Vin and I, along with our assistant superintendent, Marlene Solano, we spent the day today actually with Tecton, our architect firm, visiting different schools and looking at that and the projected needs. And so, you know, that's part of the conversation. And I think they understand that our growing enrollment is part of this whole process. And so we're keeping our ear to the ground on that.
Right. Okay. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I'll be brief here. It's 8 o'clock. I've been listening to all of these numbers and they've gone through. I'm impressed with the thought process that's gone on at this table and with you and the Board of Education to determine all the options. I have a question. As Jim said, I agree with him. We seem to be very efficient. We have less per student costs than many school systems and all of that. And we've spent all our evening talking about dollars and comparing dollars. How do we measure? And it's probably a question you can't answer, but a Board of Education philosophy. But how do the students' success as students and the degree to which they are educated compare to the dollars that we are spending? What are your goals to make sure? I read stories all the time about this school system in Maryland. They graduated kids who couldn't read or didn't know math. What measurement do you use to make sure that all of these projects and all of the monies that we're spending are resulting in adequate outcomes for our students? Does
Sure.
that make sense?
Yeah.
I mean,
and
I think we compare, when you look at those DERGs, at the level of their success seems to be high and very
Sure.
good. But what measurement is done? to
Sure.
do
So
that?
we look at a variety of common data points. So we'll look at the high school level, it's a little bit different, where you might look at SAT performance, but you also look at students enrolled in extracurricular activities. You look at AP/ECE, that's early college experience data. How many students are enrolled in those courses? What's their level of success? What do the demographics look like? Is it only boys or girls or non-special ed, or racial enrollment? Does it look relative to our overall school enrollment? At the elementary grades, we'll look at our internal data. We'll look at the best comparative data we have, which is what I shared this evening, is our reading and math performance, grades 3 through 8. I mentioned at one point we were 36th many years ago, and now we're 11th. So we look at data like that to look at our outcomes. The state has a great website called EdSite, where you can look at a lot of data around all sorts of things. Performance. When I tell you about teaching ratios, number of students to teachers, all that data is vetted and comes from one common source, and that's EdSite. And we spend a lot of time comparing that data. Is kind of an internal barometer about, are we staffing right? Are we performing where we need to be? Those sort of things. And the data has been very favorable, obviously. So that's where we look at those
Yeah,
things.
and that's just my concern is you always measure the value you get for the expenditure that you have, and it seems like we're doing a pretty good job to educate our kids, but we're focusing tonight on dollars and
Right,
cents and
yep.
putting things in piles because of cost. And I would not like to sacrifice the success of what we're doing by just only looking at the dollars. And class sizes, numbers of teachers and facilities are all part of that. That's all.
Sure,
Just
and
an
I think-
observation.
Yeah, when Mr. Barrow asks about implications, I think that's at the heart of the question, right? Like tell me about X dollars and what the implications are. And then we can work on that.
Thank you. All right. Thank you very much. This was good. It was important. It was helpful in our deliberations. We have a lot more to go, so we appreciate we'll certainly be in contact over the next couple of weeks as well, as we move forward. And that brings me to what I want to talk about before I remember to hand it back to Mr. Walsh, is that Thursday's a public information session. So we may get some public coming to ask questions, second opportunity for people at home that may want to come in or I guess they can email us questions and things too. And then after that, we will get finance. Sean, correct me if I'm wrong, because I wasn't at my desk when we talked about this. So finance on Thursday.
Finance, which includes information technology. That's right.
Okay, right. And then next Tuesday is our regular monthly council meeting, but I've been told by the big powers that be that you don't have an awful lot on the agenda, so that it wouldn't be bad if we met at 6 o'clock
Why not?
and do this, because we'd still probably get out at 8 or 8:30, because there's not a lot on the other agenda. So we will meet and we will review the capital non-recurring, and we'll get an update on revenues and possibly some other updates on the expenditures and what else. Sean?
And just also this Thursday, we'll be doing the capital budget for Public Works that we were moving.
Okay, thank you. All right, so Public Works, which we left off because of time.
At our last meeting, exactly.
Yeah, we'll review that on Thursday. And then after that, we'll have more time to set up other meetings that we need. There won't be other meetings next week after Tuesday. We have key players that'll be away, so it won't make sense to do that. But the following week, we will have probably at least one. And with the plan to adopt would be Wednesday, the 26th, not Thursday, the 27th. Mr. Slocum corrected that. He and I are both not available the night of the 27th. You're more than welcome to get this done without me, though. So if you still want to keep it that day, 26th, unless that's not available, then we can do the 25th if all of you aren't available on the 26th. But let's keep those dates, 25th and 6th, and even 4th, the Monday, kind of loose in case we need to have other reports to get updates and talk about impacts of dollars and budget numbers that we may be talking about. All right. All right. With that, I'll hand it back to Mr. Walsh. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barry. And I would just encourage the public not to wait until after we pass the budget to come to us. Try to show up on Thursday or send an email if you have any questions or concerns about what we are doing with our budget. Last public hearing, we only had one person, and it's important to get input from all of you. So I'm hoping that we can get some more input from everybody in this town versus them all complaining after we pass the budget. So appreciate it. But may I have,
I
that?
just disagree with one thing. Nobody's going to complain with the budget we adopt.
Absolutely. No, not one person will do that. Can I get a motion to adjourn? All in favor? Good night.